Very proud to introduce today's guest, U.S. Senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Ryan, my pleasure to be with you.
Now, you've spent the last week out on a Get Out the Vote tour. Since you've been on the road, what's been your biggest takeaway from the tour? And do you feel like the enthusiasm matches up to 2018 and 2020 when Democrats were able to secure major victories?
This is a midterm election, and I think there are a lot of folks out there who really don't appreciate how important this election is and how consequential it is. But we had really good turnouts in Oregon and in California and Texas. And I think people are beginning to catch on that if you are concerned about the need for a woman to control her own body, this election is important. If you're concerned about climate change and leaving a planet to our kids which is habitable, this election is very important. If you're concerned about maintaining American democracy, this election is important. And it's also important for a whole lot of economic reasons, in that if Republicans gain control over the House and the Senate, there will be really an assault on the needs of working families. So, Brian, this is a really, really important election, and I hope that people come out and vote in large numbers.
Obviously, one major contingent of that is young people, and that's a constant point of concern, whether they'll show up to vote. I believe that millennials like myself and Gen Zs now make up the biggest voting bloc, but we still vote in lower numbers than older generations.
Right.
What's your message to young people who feel like, the what we always hear, which is that the government isn't working for them?
Well, first of all, your point about lower turnouts among young people is sadly true. And it's kind of ironic because the decisions the government make right now are going to impact your generations for decades to come. And furthermore, what bothers me a lot is that the younger generation, people under 40, 45, are the most progressive generations that we have ever seen in the history of this country. These are generations that are anti-racism, they're anti-sexism, anti-homophobia. And these are folks out there that in many ways are experiencing a lower standard of living than their parents. The economy is not working for them. They have huge student debts. They can't afford housing. The wages they earn are not particularly good. So politics should be of enormous importance to those generations. And we've got to make sure that they understand what the stakes are. So my hope is that if you are concerned, as young people are, about the existential threat of climate change. This is not some abstract idea. What kind of planet are your kids and grandchildren going to have? You should be concerned about it, and young people are. Whether you're concerned about gay rights or women's rights, you should be concerned about it, and the younger generation is. And whether we have an economy that works for all or just a few should be of concern to everybody. So I really do hope that, I know that a midterm election is not as sexy as a presidential election, right? Presidential election, all the media is talking about this guy and that guy. You have debates and all that stuff. But trust me, who controls the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House is of enormous consequence. Please vote.
Now, there are progressives out there who supported you and who do feel like the Democrats didn't go far enough this cycle. I have friends myself who kind of lost confidence in politics when you didn't win, or as big oil continued to retain its power, or as big banks continued to consolidate, and on and on. I'm certain that's something that you've heard about, especially since you've been out on this tour yourself. How do you keep those people in the fold? Like, how do you bring back the disaffected folks who you've always had a unique ability to communicate with?
Hey, guess what? I am disaffected. And I'm a United States Senator. I'm chairman of the Budget Committee. I am disaffected. You're unhappy with how the Democrats function. I'm more unhappy with how the Democrats function. But in the real world, you got to take a look at where we are at this moment. And that is, clearly we need major reforms in the Democratic Party. That's what I've been fighting for years. We need a party that represents working people, that believes in economic justice, social justice, racial justice, that does not take huge amounts of money from corporate PACs. All right? That's what we need. Are we there today? No, we are not. Have we made progress in recent years? Yes, we have. And let me just say this. If you're kind of demoralized out there, understand there will be more strong progressives in the U.S. House of Representatives this coming January than there's ever been in the modern history of this country. That's real, and you made it happen. But, politics and life just is, this is not a question of instant gratification here. There were people, whether it was Martin Luther King Jr. or others who struggled for decades for racial justice, women who died in the suffragettes movement fighting for a women's right to vote. Real change does not happen overnight. We have to continue to struggle. But I do want all of those people to say, well, Democrats are not good enough. And that's true. That's true. I want you to look at the alternatives. Do you really want a political party in power that is trying to undermine American democracy, that is maintaining this big lie that Trump won the election? Do you know what that means? Democracy is at stake. Get involved. Do you really want a party out there that does not believe that women should be able to control their own bodies? I don't think you do. So I'm not here to tell you. I'm the last guy on earth to tell you that the Democrats are doing what they should be doing. They're not. And we got to reform the Democratic Party, make it stronger, make it more aggressive in standing up to big money interests, fighting for Medicare for all, canceling student debt, making public colleges and universities tuition free, making sure that we end this dysfunctional healthcare system, so that all people have healthcare as a human right, et cetera, et cetera. But you got to get out and vote, and we have to defeat Republicans next Tuesday.
Now, Shell posted $9.5 billion in profits this quarter. Chevron posted $11 billion in profits. ExxonMobil, almost $20 billion in profits. What's your message to these oil companies that have opted to fleece Americans for record profits, all doing so under the guise of inflation?
Well, Brian, what they are doing is absolutely outrageous. And my Republican colleagues are helping them do it. Look, first of all, when Republicans talk about inflation, inflation is a very serious issue. It's 8.2% in the United States. People are having a hard time filling up their gas tanks. When they go to the service station, they're having a hard time buying the food they need, the prescription drugs they need, the health care that they need. It is a real serious problem for working families. What are the causes of inflation? Well, for a start, did Joe Biden do it all by himself? And why is it that in Europe, inflation is at 11%? I think that's Joe Biden's fault. In the UK, it's at 10.1%. And it is higher in many parts of the world than it is in the United States. And the reason for that is that the pandemic has resulted in the breakdown of supply chains. That's number one. The horrific war in the Ukraine, number two. And as you've just indicated, the major reason for inflation today, my Republican colleagues won't talk about this in a million years, is the outrageous level of corporate greed we are now seeing. You indicated some of the record-breaking profit margins that the oil companies are seeing. You could do the same with the pharmaceutical industry. You could do the same with the healthcare industry. You could do the same with major food companies. What these guys are doing, and think about it from a moral perspective. You got a world in turmoil, the war, the pandemic, some breakdown in supply chains. And these guys, instead of saying, my God, what can we do to stabilize things, help working people, keep prices low, right? Might be a good thing to do. What they see is, wow, all of this confusion out there, people won't notice it. We can rip them off unconsciously. Let's go for it. Raise prices. The hell with working families. Hell with the elderly. They don't worry about them. Let's just pay attention to our stockholders. And that really stinks. And in my view, what we need to do is institute a windfall profits tax on this excessive greed. That's my view.
You touched on the Republican response to this. What do you say to these Republicans who've basically enabled these oil companies to do that because they were pretending that high prices were, like you said, all Joe Biden's fault, basically scapegoating the Democrats and at the same time giving these oil companies cover to screw over?
You got it. That's exactly what is happening. I want to say something else. When you're in my line of work, you read through dog whistles and code terms, right? So Republicans are saying the real cause of inflation in America, despite the fact that it's an international phenomenon, the real cause is government spending under the Democrats. What they're talking about, frankly, is the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that we passed in March 2021. Now, I'm the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. I played an active role in passing that bill. And you know what, Brian? I apologize to nobody for passing that bill. Let us remember where we were. I know sometimes people have short memories. March 2021, we had a pandemic sweeping the nation. 3,000 people every single day were dying. We were in the midst of the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Millions of people lost their jobs, worried about eviction. Hunger was higher than it had been for decades. So I'm not going to apologize that we gave every American, man, woman, and child, $1,400 to get through that crisis, that we extended unemployment benefits, that we expanded the child tax credit, that we made sure that hospitals in America that were overwhelmed with COVID patients did not collapse. Now, on the other hand, that's what we did. On the other hand, you know what the Republicans want to do if they get power? They want to repeal the estate tax, which applies to the top 0.1%. Elon Musk's family would have an $80 billion benefit from that tax. Is that really where we want to go? And then on top of that, because they give so much in tax breaks to the rich, they want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So the choice is, I think, pretty clear for next Tuesday.
As a segue right off of that, we've been subjected to months of these Republican attacks about inflation and gas prices and the economy. But what Republicans are trying to do by virtue of levying these attacks is to give the impression that they're going to be the responsible stewards of all of those things. What do you tell people who think that the way to combat high prices and get some economic relief is by electing Republicans?
If you are a Republican or an independent, or maybe even a Democrat thinking of voting Republican, you just ask yourself, do you think that the future should be giving massive, we're talking about $1.75 trillion in tax breaks to a few thousand of the wealthiest families in America? And do you think really the future in combating inflation is to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other programs? I don't think most Americans think that. I think what most Americans want us to do, which the Republicans will never do, is to have the courage to take on the pharmaceutical industry, which now charge us in some cases 10 times more for the prescription drugs we buy than in any other country. What the American people want us to do is lower the cost of childcare in America, which is now outrageously high. They want to make public colleges and universities tuition-free to help struggling students be able to get the higher education that they need. So I think when it's very easy if you're a Republican out there, it's very easy. What they're doing is there are problems. They're talking about the problems. Well, you know what? Real problems exist. Those problems are real. But then when you kind of corner them, you say, what's your solution? Do you think cutting Social Security is really the way we have to go? Well, then they get a little bit defensive. So I think Democrats have got to get on the offensive and take it to them.
Rick Scott had come out with a plan to sunset all federal legislation after 5 years. If it's worth keeping, then Congress will purportedly reauthorize it. Ron Johnson one-upped him and said basically that all federal legislation should be reauthorized every year. What does that mean for the programs that you had just spoken about for Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security?
It means they're on the chopping block. I mean, that's basically what it means. Either we believe that seniors in this country are entitled to Social Security. And in my view, by the way, we should expand Social Security benefits by lifting the cap on income. As you know, right now, somebody who makes $140,000 a year pays the same amount into Social Security in taxes as somebody who makes $10 million. That's absurd. So we should expand Social Security benefits for the elderly. We should move from Medicare for the elderly to Medicare for all. But the bottom line is what Republicans are saying, and they've always said this, is that programs, government programs that help working families, and it's not just Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, it's federal aid to education, it's environmental protection. Those are programs that they don't want, and they are going to go after all of those programs if they have a majority in the House and the Senate.
And I say this every week with everybody I speak to, but we ignore these things at our own peril, because the same people who were promising us that nothing was going to happen to Roe are now the same people promising us that nothing's going to happen to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
No, I mean, I got to give them credit, actually. They have been more honest than usual. You got a bunch of them, something like 150 members in the House who have made it clear that they are willing, by the way, to allow the United States to default on our debt payments if they are unable to cut Social Security and Medicare. So they're pretty overt about it. And, you are right that people may not take them seriously, but these are the guys who came within one vote of repealing the Affordable Care Act a few years ago. You recall that, which would have thrown 30 million people off the health insurance they have. These are the guys who, when they had the power, gave huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country. These are serious people. They are focused. And their goal is massive tax breaks for the rich, cuts in programs for the elderly, the children, working families, low-income people. That's what they want to do. And, they're pretty upfront about it. Our job is to make sure that they don't get away with that.
So with that said, if we're able to expand our Senate majority by 2 seats and we're able to hold the House, what happens in January of 2023?
Well, I'm not much into predictions, but I will tell you what I will do. I think we have got to recognize that the American people are angry. And Brian, they are angry for good reasons. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but real inflation adjusted for wages today are lower than they were 50 years ago, despite huge increases in worker productivity. Meanwhile, while working families are struggling, the billionaire class is growing night and day. During the pandemic alone, they saw a $2 trillion increase in their wealth. Today, we have more income and wealth inequality than any time in the history of America. Do you know that? I don't know that many people know it. You got 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. So I think what Democrats have got to do is say, look, we have got to have the courage for once in our lives to take on the incredible power of the banks, the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry. This is not easy because, as we're seeing right now, these guys have unlimited amounts of money. They're running all these, super PACs and 30-second ads. But if we want to restore faith in democracy and the government can work for working people, that is what we have to do. And as, chairman of the Budget Committee, that is what I will be doing.
Now, we're a few days out from the election, obviously from election day, but people are already voting. There's a lot of tension about what our closing message should be. And granted, Republicans have given Democrats, a ton of options, from attacks on democracy to supporting authoritarians abroad, abortion rights, threatening Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, coddling the rich, ignoring climate change, and on and on. You've always been consistently on message with economic issues, probably the most on message person that we have on the left. How do you reconcile closing with an economic message if it means sleeping on some other major issues like abortion and attacks on democracy?
No, Brian, it's not a question of sleeping on. The right of women to control their own bodies, to me, is fundamental. It is enormously important. And what can we say about the importance of preserving American democracy? And what can you say about whether or not we continue to have a planet which allows people to live in a healthy way? I mean, these are enormously important issues, so there's no pushing them aside. But what I am saying is if you are a candidate out there, politician, and you're talking to ordinary people, you have got to recognize many people, today 60% of our people live in paycheck to paycheck. They go into the grocery store and they say, my God, prices are going up. I can't afford to buy the food I need to feed my families. I can't afford rent. Rent is soaring many parts of this country. I can't afford healthcare. Healthcare costs are going up. Prescription drug costs are going up. You cannot ignore that. So I'm not saying turn your back on abortion or climate or democracy. Of course, you got to focus on those issues. But you also have to understand that in poll after poll after poll, they say to the American people, what are the most important issues facing you? People say economics. I'm not making enough to live the way that I want to live. And inflation. You got to deal with those issues. You can't push them aside.
Let's end with this. What's the first thing you're going to do after election season's over?
Well, take a break. Rest for a few days. But then we have the midterm elections. And as chairman of the Budget Committee, I have some responsibilities that I'm going to have to deal with.
Great. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time, and best of luck out there on that tour. And thank you for what you're doing.
Keep up the good work. Thank you, Brian.